seated. Court ring clock.
The record should reflect that all above certified alternates are returned to the court. Mr. Grate is present with counsel as our counsel for the state of Ohio. Mr. Snell, they call the state's next witness.
Thank you. We'll call Tim Shreffler, Your Honor.
Sir, do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Just tell us your name, please.
Lieutenant Tim Shreffler, Shreffler.
And how are you employed?
The City of Ashland Police Department.
And how long have you been with the police department?
35 years.
Okay. And what do you do currently for the police department?
I'm the night shift watch commander.
And what does that mean?
I'm in charge of the 2 squads that work night shift.
And what hours is night watch?
Normally 4 p.m. to 2 a.m.
And how long have you been assigned to that shift?
Since October of this year.
And what was your prior shift?
Day shift, 6 a.m. to 2 or 4 p.m.
Okay. And were you working day shift on September 13th of 2016?
I was.
And prior to September 13th, did you play a role in the investigation of a missing person by the name of Elizabeth Griffith?
I did.
And what did you do reference that investigation?
I assisted Captain Lay. I wrote a search warrant for Elizabeth's apartment at Village Green.
Show counsel, States Exhibit 357. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, this is a copy of the warrant that I wrote.
Okay. And what was the area you were proposing to search?
The apartment in the 242 building at Matthews Avenue, apartment L.
Okay. And it was your understanding that was whose apartment?
Elizabeth Griffith.
And did you have that affidavit reviewed and the search warrant signed by a competent judicial authority?
I did.
Who would that be?
Judge Versillo down in juvenile court.
Okay. And is States Exhibit 357 a true and accurate copy of the search warrant and related affidavit and return prepared by you?
Yes, I did the warrant and Captain Lay actually did the return.
And did you accompany Captain Lay to that location?
I did.
And what were your impressions?
The house was clean. There was, I didn't really do too much of the searching. I did one of the bedrooms and he did the kitchen and the living room area.
And then Captain Lay took custody and control of any evidence collected?
Yes.
Did there come a time when you were made aware that there was another missing person in the city of Ashland?
Yes.
And who would that be?
Stacy Stanley.
And approximately when did you become aware of this missing person?
It was the weekend before the 13th. I can't remember if it was Saturday or Sunday. I was in there on overtime and her family had come in and wanted to speak to someone about her being missing.
Okay, and who did they speak to?
They spoke to me.
And I guess what was the general topic of conversation?
They just told us that, or told me that she was missing and that she was last seen at the BP station in Ashland.
Okay, and did you communicate this to your fellow officers on the shift?
I did. Initially, while I was talking to them, someone got a hold of the dispatcher and said that they thought her vehicle had been located on East 9th Street.
And did you travel to that location?
I did.
And were you able to verify if that was the case?
Yes.
Was it?
Yes, it was her car.
Okay. And at some point, were you relieved that day by the oncoming shift, next shift?
Yes, Sergeant Baker was the night shift.
Okay, and did you relate the details of this missing persons incident to Sergeant Baker?
I did.
All right. And you told us you were working on the morning of September 13th?
Yes.
What happened the morning of September 13th?
It was Sergeant Cox, Officer Dorsey, and I. We got a call, the dispatcher said they had a 911 call of a woman that had been abducted and was being held in a house by the 4th Street Laundry.
So what'd you do?
We all responded there. Officer Dorsey and I parked on it would be the west side of the building.
Okay, and what'd you proceed to do?
There was some confusion on which house, because the houses are almost identical, so we began going from house to house while they had her on the phone. And then at one point, the dispatcher said that she could hear the door being rattled. That was Officer Dorsey at the house she was actually found in, so we went over there.
Okay. And what happened then?
I was standing at the door came open, there was a naked woman standing there at the screen door. We called her out, put her in the yard between the two houses. I asked where the defendant was, and she told us what room he was at. All three of us made entry and took him into custody.
Okay. And once the defendant was in custody, what did you do?
I walked out with them. Well, after they had taken him into custody, I went and looked for the woman. She was hiding in the bathroom. She'd come back in the house. I walked out with them, and then after they were in the car, I went back into the house. She had gotten herself dressed. She was in the bathroom. I asked her if she needed to be looked at by the medics. She declined, and then I put her in my car.
How did she look?
She looked scared. I just saw her briefly in the house, and then when we were in the car, I talked with her.
Okay. And what was her demeanor like?
She was very scared. At one point, I had to leave to call Captain Lay to let him know what we had, and she was very upset about me leaving her.
And when you first made contact with the defendant, what did he look like?
He was naked in the bed. I saw him for maybe a minute.
And did you re-enter the house after the victim was in your car and the defendant was placed in custody?
I did.
For what purpose?
We wanted to clear the rest of the house, look for anybody else that would be in there.
Okay. And was anybody else in there?
No, nobody alive. We cleared the basement first, and then we went up to the second floor.
Okay. And was the basement secured in some manner?
Yes, there was a slide bolt. The handle had been broken off. I got a screwdriver out of the living room. I replaced that knob that was broken and was able to open the door.
And what was your impression of the basement area of the house?
As soon as the door opened, there was a very foul smell and lots of flies.
And you went upstairs?
Yes.
And was the upstairs secured in some way?
Yes, it was.
How so?
The door was locked somehow. I'm not sure how. I got an entry tool out of the car that was like a pry bar on one end and a little sledgehammer on the other. And I used that to breach the door to get upstairs.
And what was your impression of the upstairs?
There was nothing really. There was a bed that had some restraints on it, and there was a bathroom at the top that the crack at the bottom of the door was covered with like towels and clothing that cracked between the door and the floor.
The one in the bathroom?
Yes.
Did you notice in the room with the bed that had the restraints tied on it, was there a closet in that room?
I didn't know that until later when I went back in with BCI. When we initially cleared it, it was still dark outside, and all that stuff was piled there. I didn't know there was a door there.
So you couldn't even tell there was a door there?
No.
And then at some point, you said you called Captain Lay and briefed him on the situation?
I did, yes.
And did you transport Lori Svillick on station?
I did.
Now, as part of your duties with the Ashland Police Department, do you also have responsibilities relating to the evidence?
I do.
What are those responsibilities?
I'm an evidence custodian, so I'll take stuff that officers submit, and then I'll move it into the evidence room.
Okay, and at some point in time, I guess, did the evidence in the evidence room relating to this matter need to be redistributed?
It did.
Would you explain that?
Most of the stuff was in the Sally Port cage, so I entered it and just put the stickers on it, the evidence stickers.
And what is the Sally Port cage?
It's just a fenced-in area in the Sally Port at the police station.
And was the evidence already located within the Sally Port?
Yes, when it was originally brought in, most of it went in there, and I never even really moved it. I just entered it and then put the labels on the stuff.
Okay. And then did you have to, since you added the numbers or relabeled items of evidence, did you then have to document that handling the evidence
Yes,
within evidence logs?
yes.
Show you State's Exhibit 120. Identify that.
It's copies of our evidence sheets from this case.
Okay. And does State's Exhibit 120 document your handling of evidence in this matter?
It does. My initials are on the bottom, the Lieutenant TBS.
Okay, and what, relating to the evidence that's listed in State's Exhibit 120, what'd you do relative to those?
At this point, I put the stuff from evidence into the Sally Port cage, and then at one point, I believe I got some car keys out so BCI could process the car, and then I put the keys back. And basically, that's all I did with these items.
Okay, so the items contained in there, with the exception of the Mitsubishi car keys, never left Sally Port?
Correct.
The car keys did.
Yes.
I'll show you State's Exhibit 155.
Okay.
Can you identify that document?
Yes, it's got the BCI label on it, and then this is our police department label that I generated, and it's item number 46. And if you go to the sheets, item number 46 is listed as a paper bag containing a set of Mitsubishi car keys.
And are those car keys that we have marked as State's Exhibit 155, and they appear to be in substantially similar condition as to when you took custody control of them?
Yes.
Now, she's State's Exhibit 202. What is that?
It's listed as item 84, a thumb drive with some kind of scans. I can't make out the writing.
Okay, and does that form document your handling of that piece of evidence?
Yes, I took it out of the locker A6, and then I immediately put it in the Sally Port cage with the rest of the items of evidence.
And what is locker B6?
It's a small wall locker in the hallway at the police station.
And is that an area where patrol officers and non-evidence related officers can put an item of evidence?
Yes, they submit it in the locker, and then there's a secured box that they can drop the key in that's only accessible by evidence officers.
I'll show you State's Exhibit 8.
Okay. And this matches item 84 and item 84 on the sheet.
Okay, and that would be the item you took out from the locker A6 and put this out?
Yes,
Does it appear to be in substantially similar condition as to when it was in your custody and control?
yes.
Show you Exhibit 321. Tell us what 321 is.
It's also a copy of a police department evidence sheet filled out by Detective Major.
Okay. And does it demonstrate your handling of any evidence in this case?
Yes.
What is that?
I took the items out of locker number 4. There's 5 items listed on this sheet, and I put them in the Sally Port cage with the rest of the items.
And locker 4, is that similar in nature to locker 6?
Yes, it's just bigger. It's kind of like a bus station locker.
How many lockers are there?
There's 6 of the bus station ones, and I think 12 of the smaller ones, and then we have a big wall locker for big items.
Show States Exhibit 301.
Okay. And this is item 1 on this sheet, and it's item number 1 on the label.
Okay, and is that one of the items you took from locker 4 and put in the Sally Port cage?
Yes,
And does it appear to be in substantially similar condition as to when it was in your custody?
yeah, yes.
Show you States Exhibit 273.
Yes.
What do those 2 pages include?
These are items that Captain Lay took out of, I believe, Elizabeth Griffith's apartment.
Okay, and does page 2 of that evidence log indicate your handling of any evidence in this matter?
Yes.
What would that be?
I took the items out of locker number 1, which is one of the big bus station type lockers, and moved that into the Sally Port cage with the rest of the items.
First, States Exhibit 268.
Okay. That's item number 1 on this sheet.
Okay, and 270.
This is item number 5, which would be on the second page. Yes.
States Exhibit 271.
This is item number 9, which is also on the second sheet.
And all 3 of those items have been removed from the evidence locker and put into the Sally Port cage by yourself?
Yes.
And do they all appear to be in substantially similar conditions to when they were in your custody?
They do.
Show you States Exhibit 274.
Yes.
What is that?
It's a copy of the police department evidence sheet filled out by Officer Eggman.
And does that form demonstrate your handling of items of evidence?
Yes.
I'll show you States Exhibit 257.
Yes.
By that,
Yes, it's on the sticker on the back from the police department. It's item number 7, which is listed on the sheet.
okay, and did you handle that particular item?
I did.
No, sir.
Officer Eggman had put it in a refrigerator at the police station, and I took it out of there and I moved it to the Sally Port cage.
Okay. And then, was there a time when you re-received this particular item?
I don't believe so. I think it was put back in the locker by then Sergeant Alding after it came back from BCS.
And does State's Exhibit 257 appear to be in substantially similar conditions to when you removed from the refrigerator and put it in the soundboard.
Yes.
State's Exhibit 201.
This is a copy of a police department evidence sheet filled out by Officer Newman.
And does it demonstrate your handling of items of evidence in this case?
Yes.
Show you State's Exhibit 200.
It's got the police department evidence sticker that lists item number 1 corresponding to this sheet.
Okay, and did you handle that particular item at some point?
I did. I took it out of a locker A5 and put it in the Sally port cage with the rest of the items.
And does it appear to be in substantially similar condition as to when it was in your custody and control?
Yes.
Show you State's Exhibit 199. Identify that document.
Again, it's a copy of a police department evidence sheet filled out again by Officer Newman.
And State's Exhibit 198.
Yes, it's the item number 2 on the sticker, and it matches item number 2 on the sheet.
Okay, and did you handle that particular item of evidence at some point?
I did. I took it out of locker A6 and put it in the Sally port cage.
Does it appear to be in substantially similar conditions to when it was in your custody?
Yes.
Exhibit 197. Can you identify that document?
It's a copy of an evidence sheet filled out by Detective Evans.
Show you State's Exhibit 191.
Item 82 on the sticker, and it matches item 82 on the sheet.
And State's Exhibit 196.
Item 83 on the sticker, and it's listed as item 83 on the sheet.
And at some point were those two items handled by yourself?
Yes, I took them out of locker number 2 and put them in the Sally port cage.
They appear to be in substantially similar conditions and in your custody.
They do.
And State's Exhibit 276.
The top sheet is a police department sheet, and the next 2 pages are evidence log generated by BCI.
And does that demonstrate your handling of any items of evidence?
Yes.
Show you State's Exhibit 388.
The sticker lists it as item number 20, and it matches item number, there's also a BCI sticker that lists it as item number 13, and it's listed as 13 on the 3rd page.
Third page. And then that's incorporated into the police department evidence log from the
Yes.
BCI?
Yes, it's our item number 20.
Okay, and what did you do with this particular item of evidence?
I took them out of locker number 4 and put them in the Sally Port cage.
And does it appear to be in substantially similar condition as to when you took custody and control?
It does.
And all of the evidence logs that you've looked at thus far in your testimony, they all appear to be true and accurate copies of the evidence logs used in the regular course of business with the Ashland Police Department?
Yes.
Now, Lieutenant, do you go through the evidence lockers at the beginning of your shift or at the end, or
It just depends on when I have free time.
you just go over the evidence lockers and see what's in there?
If there's lockers that have items in them, I try to empty them so that there's space available in case they would take more evidence.
Okay. And how long have you been, I guess, removing the items from the evidence lockers and placing them elsewhere?
It's probably been 20 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Lieutenant. Nothing further.
Ross? No question, Judge, thank you.
Thank you, Judge. I do.
Sir, can you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Yes, my name is Dr. Todd Barr, B as in boy, A-R-R.
Dr. Barr, what do you do for a living?
I am currently employed with the Summit County Medical Examiner's Office as a deputy medical examiner.
What does a deputy medical examiner do?
Medical examiners, we investigate medical legal death cases, cases that involve violent deaths, including homicides, suicides, accidents, unwitnessed natural deaths, unattended deaths, deaths in police custody, and any kind of suspicious deaths.
And how long have you been a deputy examiner?
I began my training in July of 2016, and I finished my fellowship in June of 2017, and I've been a deputy medical examiner at Summit County since.
Before working at Summit County, you did a fellowship, you said?
Yes.
Where was that at?
That was at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office.
So in September of 2016, were you employed at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And are you a board-certified physician?
Yes, I am.
Do you have to receive any kind of education or training to be a deputy medical examiner?
Yes.
Okay. Showing defense counsel Stacy Exhibit 358. Dr. Barr, I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as Stacy Exhibit 358. Do you recognize what that document is?
Yes, I do.
What is that, please?
This is a copy of my curriculum vitae, which is 7 pages long.
Is that a true and accurate copy of your CV?
Yes, it is.
And does that document your education background and some of the training that you received for your position?
Yes, it does.
Is that the sort of thing that you keep in the ordinary course of business as a deputy medical examiner?
Yes, we do, and we keep it updated. on a
Okay.
regular basis.
So tell us about your educational background.
Sure. I completed my bachelor's degree in science at the University of New Hampshire in Durham, New Hampshire. I then went on to complete my medical degree training at Dartmouth Medical School, which is now known as the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth in Hanover, New Hampshire. Subsequent to that, I did residency training in psychiatry at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire. Following that, I went into pathology. I did a residency in anatomic and clinical pathology at Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Then did a surgical pathology fellowship, which is subspecialty training, for 1 year at Allegheny General Hospital. Had a short period of employment with a professional laboratory, and then did my forensic fellowship training, which is pathology subspecialty training at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office in Cleveland.
Dr. Barr, what is pathology?
Pathology is the study of illness and disease in the human body.
Okay. And are you board certified?
I am board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
What are the differences between those three things?
Anatomic pathology is the disease process that you would find, say, in a surgical specimen at a hospital when someone has an operation and they take a piece of tissue out. We look at the tissue under microscopes to make diagnoses.
Okay.
Clinical pathology is the study of pathology that involves bodily fluids, anything other than tissue samples involving blood, fluids, that type of thing. Chemistries, toxicology, that type of thing.
Okay. And I think forensic pathology was the last one?
Forensic pathology is a subspecialty of anatomic pathology, which is the study of forensic medicine in the application of investigating medical legal death investigations.
And you're board certified in those three areas?
Yes, I am.
And are you current in those certifications?
Yes, I am.
Okay. What kind of training, in addition to what you've described, have you received any other training to qualify for your position as a deputy medical examiner?
We do additional ongoing training as any professional would. We attend conferences, write articles, do presentations, educate the public, that type of thing. Ongoing medical education activities.
Okay, so it didn't just stop at your certification, you continue to learn and grow in your profession?
That's right. It's a requirement of board certification.
Okay. So Dr. Barr, you told us that you were employed at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office in September of 2016. Did you have the occasion to perform an autopsy on two individuals, Elizabeth Griffith and Stacy Hicks, aka Stacy Stanley?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Dr. Barr, could you tell us generally, how is an autopsy performed from when a decedent's body is brought to the medical examiner's office and then continuing from there?
Generally speaking, when a decedent arrives at our facility, we will log that individual in, document the transfer, the chain of custody, photograph the decedent inside the body bag they received in, and then progressively reveal what's inside the bag and photograph as we go. And then it's determined based on what type of case is presenting before us, whether we will continue with a full, complete autopsy, which includes an external and an internal examination, or conduct a partial autopsy, which would be a focused examination on a certain part of the body, or simply an external examination where we review the entire surfaces of the external part of the body to ensure that there are no trauma-related injuries.
So Dr. Barr, is that at that initial point when the body is photographed as it's received, is it at that point that you make that determination what route to take on your autopsy?
Yes.
What sorts of factors lead in one direction or the other?
We take into account scene investigation. particularly in homicide cases. A forensic pathologist at Cuyahoga County will go out to the scene. If it's not involving a potential homicide case, we have medical legal death investigators that do attend and go out to the death investigation scene, collect evidence at the scene, photograph the scene, document everything at the scene, and bring that back to us, create a report, an investigation report that we review as part of our review process to see what type of case we're dealing with, as well as any police reports or discussions with detectives that may be part of an ongoing investigation.
For the first part of that, is that for cases that occur in Cuyahoga County?
Yes.
Okay. Is it fair to say that the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office provides services in doing autopsies for surrounding counties?
Absolutely. The county is contracted with, I believe it's 11 surrounding counties that don't have forensic pathologists to do their autopsies, so we are subcontracted to do their work.
Okay. So, but I guess the point to what you were saying right there is that some outside information about the investigation can help you to determine what route to take on your autopsy. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. After then documenting the decedent as she has arrived and then determining what route to take, if it's a full autopsy, what kind of steps do you take next?
So if it's a complicated homicide case, we would document all of the clothing that the decedent is wearing. We would photograph and collect any evidence that may be attached to the outside of the clothing or in the vicinity of the body. If we need to collect the clothing as evidence, then we would photograph each piece of article of clothing that is removed and have it documented sequentially how that's removed. And then we would continue with the external examination of the body. We would photograph and document any type of injuries or patterns or anything that we would see on the body before proceeding to opening the body through the Y incision.
Dr. Barr, is it fair to say when you're looking for these injuries, you're looking for potential causes of death or other injuries suffered by a decedent? Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So what would happen next then in this process?
So once we've documented externally everything that's happened to the decedent, and we would proceed then with an internal examination where we would open the body and we would examine each organ system systematically, one by one, to see if there's any natural causes of death or any catastrophic natural illness that could account for the decedent's death. If we haven't found any trauma or injury-related causes. And we would then document all of the internal organs, the brain, the weights, size, and any findings that we would find that would be pertinent.
So Dr. Barr, when you're doing the external examination, if you don't see things like stab wounds or bullet wounds or obvious things that would have or could have caused someone's death, that's when you are looking at natural causes of death and other potential causes inside the body to rule those out as either a cause or not a cause of death.
Sure.
Okay. And through this process then, as you are making this determination, do you document your findings?
Absolutely.
Do you write a report as to your findings?
Yes.
And are those reports kept in the ordinary course of business when we're talking specifically about this case at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Dr. Barr, for Elizabeth Griffith, I want to talk to you about the autopsy you performed on her. Before we get into the particulars, do you ever, in your job as a deputy medical examiner, rely on things like dental records as part of your job?
Yes.
For what purpose?
For identification purposes.
Under what sort of circumstances would that either be relevant or necessary to rely on dental records to identify a decedent?
So typically, we would identify the decedent either by next of kin, by some sort of visual aid, by fingerprints, dental records, x-ray records, that type of thing. And typically in cases that come into Cuyahoga from another county that county usually presents that individual already identified. In this particular case, they were not identified, and we did use dental records of Elizabeth Griffith to compare ante-mortem and post-mortem dental x-rays to ensure identity.
So ante-mortem means before death, is that right?
That's correct.
And post-mortem means after death.
That's correct.
So were, in this case, x-rays taken of the person who came to be identified as Elizabeth Griffith?
Yes, they were.
And did you compare those post-mortem after death dental x-rays with records from before death?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Dr. Barr, the dental records that you compared, were those provided to you?
Yes.
The ante-mortem, the pre-death records?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't have to go to a dentist's office and get those records yourself?
They were requested.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been previously identified. This is Stacy Exhibit 351. This was identified earlier today as Elizabeth Griffith's dental records, x-rays specifically of her mouth, her teeth, and her jaw. But these have been the records that you used to compare to the x-rays that were taken later after Elizabeth Griffith's death?
Yes, State's Exhibit 351 represents the ante-mortem dental x-rays that were used for comparison.
Okay. So, Dr. Barr, you did this comparison of x-rays, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
What did you determine?
I determined that when you do examinations where you are comparing dental x-rays, you need to find a minimum of 3 comparable points that you can, with a reasonable degree of medical certainty, make the determination that these are from the same people. And that was done in this case. There were at least 3 points that were identical.
And so based on that, Dr. Barr, who did you identify, the person that we have come to describe as Elizabeth Griffith, who did you identify her as?
I identified her as Elizabeth Griffith.
Thank you. So, Dr. Barr, could you take us through, please, your autopsy examination of Elizabeth Griffith?
So the examination of Elizabeth Griffith, she arrived in our facility in an advanced state of decomposition, which was partially the reason why we needed to do dental x-rays. We weren't able to get good fingerprints from her. And when her body arrived, she was wrapped in various garments that had her restrained with her arms behind her back and her legs behind her back. She was in a state of decomposition where the discoloration was severe on her skin. She had moderate insect activity, including fly, larvae, eggs, maggots, that type of thing. And she had been in a state of desiccation, which is drying out, and the skin becomes kind of leathery, yellow-brown and leathery, and the fingertips become dried out to the point where you can't get a fingerprint from them. Sometimes there's degloving, which means the surface of the skin comes off. And in addition, when insect activity begins, they usually start in areas that are moist, like the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the ears, the genital area, and those areas become obscured due to the activity.
So, Dr. Barr, are these observations that you've just described to us the observations you made when Elizabeth Griffith's body was, you first observed her at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's office?
Yes.
Now, I'd ask you if, for any autopsy you do, if you do a report, and you indicated that you
Yes.
do, right? Did you do a report, in this case, for Elizabeth Griffith's autopsy?
Yes, I did.
Show defense counsel Stacy Exhibit 359, as well as 360, 361, 362, 363, 364, all of which are photos. Dr. Barr, opinion was marked for identification purposes as Stacy Exhibit 359. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
State's Exhibit 359 is a copy of my report of autopsy, which consists of the front page with the anatomic diagnoses and cause of death, and then the next 3 pages are a detailed, systematic description of what was found on the internal examination, and the final 3 pages are the toxicology report that was issued by Dr. Schuler in this particular case.
Now, concerning those last 3 pages, Dr. Barr, the toxicology report, you had indicated, I think earlier, that when an autopsy is being done, this kind of information is important. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why is that? Why is the toxicology report important to your findings as a deputy medical examiner?
Toxicology reports are important because they will tell us if there's some sort of drug in the person's system, what kind of influence they might be under, whether it's alcohol or drugs, that type of thing, any illicit drugs or medications.
And is that something that you rely on, the toxicology report, for any autopsy as part of the process in making your ultimate determination as to the cause of death?
Yes, it helps rule out other possibilities of death.
Now, the document as a whole, as you've described it, is that a fair and accurate copy of your autopsy report for Elizabeth Griffith?
Yes, it is.
And is that kept in the ordinary course of business at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, Dr. Barr, you've described to us Elizabeth Griffith's appearance when you first observed the body. Can you tell us in a little bit more detail, or I guess maybe make clear, was she clothed?
She was not clothed, although she had clothing attached to her extremities.
And can you describe how that clothing was attached?
She had, her hands were secured behind her back with a red and white striped shirt. Then she also had a piece of black fabric that was wrapped around her right ankle that extended up under this red and white striped shirt, up around her neck and back down, securing her right leg up behind her back. And then an additional piece of black fabric was around the left ankle, which when we received the body was not attached to anything at the time, but her left leg was behind her back as well.
So her hands were tied behind her back,
Yes.
and there's a piece of fabric attached to her right ankle that continued up underneath the hand bindings and attached to her neck.
It wrapped around her neck.
Wrapped
yes.
around her neck, thanks. And then there was an additional binding on the ankle that wasn't, when you got control of the body, wasn't connected to anything.
Correct.
Okay. Exhibit 360. Do you recognize what State's Exhibit 360 is?
Yes, I do.
What is that, please?
State's Exhibit 360 is a photograph of Elizabeth Griffith as she appeared to us with her unique identifying case number, OU-16-245. And this is the state in which she presented to us. However, with the caveat that this is after we've done trace evidence collection and the articles of clothing have been removed, and she is now no longer face down, she's lying on her back.
And that's part of that process you've previously described to us. After a decedent is photographed as they come, then things are removed from the body, and you photograph it and examine the body again.
Correct.
Okay. Is that exhibit, you have a was Stacy Exhibit 360, is that right?
Yes.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of the decedent, Elizabeth Griffith, whose autopsy you performed and are describing this today?
Yes.
And when was that autopsy performed?
The autopsy was performed on September 14th, 2016.
Okay. Judge, can we approach?
That
I'll make sure my bailiffs are up to speed here. Okay. Attorney McNamara, you can continue whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Barr, I'm handing you this unidentified States Exhibit 361. You recognize what that is?
Yes, I do.
What is that, please?
States Exhibit 361 is a photograph of Elizabeth Griffith's body as she appeared to us. This was after she had been moved from a prone position, which is face down, to a rolled up onto her left side, showing the pieces of fabric that had her extremities bound behind her back.
Doctor, is States Exhibit 361 a fair and accurate representation of that view of Elizabeth Griffith's body as she was presented at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, it is.
Judge, with the court's permission, we'd like to publish State's Exhibit 361.
Any objection?
No objection, Judge.
You may.
So, Dr. Barr, you had previously indicated that the wrists were bound together with a piece of fabric. Do you see that in this photograph?
Yes, I do.
Okay. That red and white striped shirt, is that correct?
Yes.
In this particular view in Stacy Exhibit 361, can we see Miss Griffith's left arm or left ankle or wrist?
No.
Okay. But the one we can see, the right one, appears to be bound by that piece of fabric. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And does this also document what you had testified to previously, the piece of clothing that bound the right ankle to the neck?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. And you Stacy Exhibit 363. So 361, I think I asked you, that's a fair and accurate representation of Ms. Griffith.
Yes.
I'll answer 362 instead. What is 362 photograph of?
State's Exhibit 362 is a photograph of Elizabeth Griffith's body as presented to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office with these ligatures still in place, and she is now photographed on her right side, depicting the posterior or her back area with the fabric as previously described in place.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of that with Ms. Griffith from that date?
Yes.
Judge, of course, permission to publish this photo, State's Exhibit 362.
Any objection?
No objection.
Photo will be published.
Dr. Barr, in this photo, State's Exhibit 362, can we see Elizabeth Griffith's left ankle?
Yes.
Okay. And is that the one that was bound, but it looks like the pants weren't connected to anything else when you got the body?
Yes. It was a pair of black pants that were tied. One leg of the pants were tied around the left ankle, and the end of the other leg of the pants were tucked under the red and white striped shirt, but they weren't attached to anything.
Okay. So like the binding from the right ankle, both of those were underneath the red and white striped shirt that bound Elizabeth's wrists?
Yes,
Correct.
that's correct.
Thank you. And that's a fair and accurate representation of Ms. Griffith?
Yes, it is.
State's Exhibit 363. Can you identify that photograph?
State's Exhibit 363 is a photograph of Elizabeth Griffith's back as she presented to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office with these ligatures in place. And in this photograph, at the top of the photograph, you can see her left hand with the red and white striped fabric attached around her wrist, continuing to the bottom of the photograph to her right hand with that black piece of pant fabric tucked underneath the red and white fabric.
Okay, is that a fair and accurate representation of that view of Elizabeth Griffith from the day you performed the autopsy?
Yes, it is.
Judge, may we publish that photograph?
Any objection?
No objection.
Photo will be published.
So Dr. Barr, what we see here that's new, we can see the left wrist now and see that the left wrist and the right wrist are bound together with that shirt as you've previously described. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Judge. So, Dr. Barr, you did your preliminary examination of the body. Is it fair to say we're only looking at a very small number of photographs, but many, many photographs were taken to document Miss Griffith and her condition as she came to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, I don't know exactly how many photographs, but she was documented with trace evidence photographs and with autopsy photographs, and it numbered over 100 at least.
Okay. And the photos that we saw, that we have seen published, those were before the actual autopsy was conducted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That was part of that initial examination you've already described.
The external examination.
After completing, well, was there anything of note, Dr. Barr, to you when you did the external examination? And specifically notable in trying to determine the cause of death in this case?
With the condition of the body and the way she presented with these pieces of fabric wrapped around, it clearly high on the list is an asphyxial death. Now, whether that's by soft ligature or other mechanisms, that's yet to be determined through the internal examination.
Did you observe any stab wounds or bullet wounds or punctures of any kind?
There were no external injuries whatsoever, including stab wounds, bullet wounds, that type of thing. Bruising is a difficult thing to assess with a decomposing body because of the discoloration, so that would be difficult to assess.
Was it based on that you don't have these other obvious indicators of physical trauma that you sort of, as you're doing the internal examination, are thinking maybe an asphyxiation death?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about having a little bit of outside information and that can help to know what to look for. The fact that the body of Elizabeth Griffith came to you when you did this autopsy and was bound in the way that you've described and that we've seen in the state's exhibits that you explained, is that relevant to you in your examination?
Yes.
Why?
Clearly, based on my education, this presents as some type of foul play. Clearly, this isn't a natural death. A person doesn't die in this state naturally.
Okay. So anything else of note on the body itself before you performed a more in-depth examination of the internal part of Elizabeth Griffith?
When we took the ligatures off, or the pieces of fabric off from the neck and from the ankles and the wrists, there was blanching, which is a whitening of the skin. And basically that just means when the fabric is tied around, if it's tight enough, it can squeeze the underlying blood from the skin below out of the skin, so that as the dying process begins and lividity, which is the pooling of blood, sets in, you would leave behind a white mark that would be indicative of this ligature was there at the time of the death or shortly thereafter.
The blanching that you've described doesn't, and I want to make sure I've got your last answer clear, doesn't indicate that's necessarily how a person died, but that a binding or ligature was on the body around the time of death. Is that correct?
Correct. In this particular case, when you have decomposition, the body begins to bloat in the natural process, and even if a loose ligature is around someone's neck or wrist, as their body swells, that blanching will still occur. So that could be a process of being in place while the body's being decomposing, or it could have been there present during the actual death itself.
Dr. Barr, where on Elizabeth's body did you observe this blanching as you've described it?
It was circumferentially or completely around both of her ankles, both of her wrists, and around her neck.
And Dr. Barr, were those all places where you observed bindings attached to Elizabeth?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you this mark for identification purposes as Stacy Exhibit 364. What is that?
State's Exhibit 364 is a photograph of from the left side of Elizabeth's body. Her chin and upper part of her head will be in the top portion of the photograph. The back of her head will be to the right of the photograph. And in the center of the photograph is a blanched area which was underneath the black ligature that went around her neck.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of Elizabeth Griffith after that ligature around her neck was removed during your autopsy?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, publish that photograph.
Any objection?
No objection.
Photograph will be published.
So Dr. Barr, as we look at the screen, it's oriented a little bit differently perhaps than the photograph that I handed you. That center section, I think you described that as Elizabeth's neck, is that correct?
Excuse me, so where the ruler is would be along her left ear and jawline. So in the photograph as it's depicted on the screen, the back of her head would be at the bottom of the photograph, as she would be lying on the table.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Judge. Judge, if you want to, thank you.
It didn't take. Here we go.
So, Dr. Barr, after making these observations of Elizabeth's body, that there weren't stab wounds or bullet wounds, and the blanching, as you've already described, was there anything else about the external part of her body that was relevant to your analysis in this case?
Just the degree of decomposition. She also had numerous pieces of debris on the anterior or the front part of her body. Her breasts and abdomen were blanched as well and flattened, which would indicate that she was lying in a face-down position for that time period. And perhaps this debris was on whatever surface she was laid on.
Dr. Barr, has there been an occasion when you've performed an autopsy where you have noted dried fecal matter on a decedent?
Yes.
Did you note in this particular case with Elizabeth Griffith, if you recall, any dried fecal matter on her body?
I did not.
Okay. So after the findings that you've already described to us, Dr. Barr, what did you do next in your autopsy?
So the next portion of the examination would be the internal examination, where we would look internally, systematically, to determine, paying close attention to the neck area because of this blanching. We want to make sure to determine what type of asphyxial death this could be, and there are classic findings in different types of asphyxial deaths.
So how specifically did you perform that internal examination, doctor? And are you also looking for other things that could possibly cause death, to rule them out or not?
Absolutely. I mean, we're still looking for natural causes. This could have been a natural death that somebody tied somebody up and didn't want anyone to know about, or this could be part of the mechanism. So we're also looking for, was there a heart attack? Was there any tumors? Were there any other indications that she had some sort of natural catastrophic event occurring as well? We need to rule that out as well.
And doctor, as you're performing the internal examination, do you do that systematically? Meaning you move from organ to organ and to determine whether or not that could be a factor in the death?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case with Elizabeth Griffith?
Yes, I did.
And in examining her organs, was there anything that would suggest to you a cause of death?
No.
Okay, so you were able to rule out these things you just mentioned, heart attack, kidney failure, other kinds of disease that would have been obvious in the organs?
Exactly.
Okay. So what else did you do as part of this internal examination?
So focusing on the neck area, when we have any type of asphyxial death or possible manual strangulation, that type of thing, we do a very detailed layer by layer dissection of the soft tissues and the muscles they're called the strap muscles. They're the muscles that hold up the neck in place so you can turn your head in different directions. As well as the bone, the hyoid bone, which forms the bottom of the roof or the floor of the mouth, and then the cartilages of the larynx, the trachea, those type of things. We look for injuries, we look for hemorrhage in the strap muscles, we look for fractures in these bones, and we also do a complete posterior neck to look for any hemorrhage in and around the cervical spine, the base of the head, those types of things.
Doctor, when you're looking for a fracture to the hyoid bone or to the cartilage in this area as you described it, what could that indicate to you? Why are you looking for that?
So typically, there's a couple of different mechanisms that can cause asphyxiation. There are a couple of different neck holds that can be applied, a crossbar hold, or which is where the arm or an object is straight across the front of the anterior neck. With pressure applied backwards, that would close off the windpipe, so it would prevent any oxygen from getting into the air and thus getting into the blood system. Although it doesn't stop the flow of blood to the brain. It only stops the air flow. And in that particular case, you would be likely to see injury to those cartilages and that hyoid bone. The same way with a manual strangulation, if someone put their hands on someone's neck and pushed in with their thumbs to try to compress the windpipe, you would expect to see injury to the windpipe and potentially the hyoid bone as well.
Did you observe injuries to the hyoid bone or to the cartilage in that area that you've already described in the case of Elizabeth Griffith?
I did not.
And so you didn't have those indicators for the arm bar or the sort of face-to-face thumbs on the windpipe strangulation, is that correct?
That's correct.
There was a third way, though, that you alluded to. What's that?
So another way is called a sleeper hold, or it's when someone wraps their arm around an individual's neck where the front portion of the neck would be at the elbow. So the pressure is coming from the upper arm and the forearm at an angle on the sides of the neck with enough force, which is roughly 11 pounds of pressure, you can occlude or shut off the carotid arteries and the jugular veins, thus compressing the blood vessels that supply about 85 to 90% of the blood to the brain. You can stop the flow of blood to the brain so that oxygen is not getting to the brain.
So if the front of someone's neck is kind of in the crook of the elbow, then the forearm and the bicep area are applying pressure to the carotid artery. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And there's no pressure to the windpipe.
And if blood flow is cut off by closing off the carotid artery and the blood flow is cut off to the brain, is that a potential cause of death?
Yes.
Okay. So in this case, you didn't observe the damage to the bone, the hyoid bone, and the cartilage. So based on your training experience, what does that lead you to believe about that particular part of the body when you're doing your examination?
So it led me to believe that she was somehow asphyxiated by having pressure applied to these vessels in her neck. That could be done by this sleeper hold or by a soft ligature that wouldn't leave a mark, but most likely it would be from some sort of compression to the neck.
Now, Dr. Barr, referencing you sometimes get outside information. Have you sometimes received outside information like that a person says this is how the death occurred that is inconsistent with your findings?
Occasionally.
Okay. What do you do with that?
We would explain to them that the evidence is not consistent with what's being described.
So outside information can help to inform your examination, but it's not the be-all, end-all, and if you have a different conclusion, you're going to say that didn't happen the way they said.
Absolutely.
Okay. Dr. Barr, did you have the occasion to watch a video, in this case after your autopsy had been concluded, of the defendant demonstrating how the crimes were committed?
I did.
Okay. And do you recall the sleeper hold? It was on a detective at a demonstration. Was what you saw consistent with your findings in this case?
Yes.
That the sleeper hold by wrapping the arm around somebody's neck and cutting off blood flow to the brain was the cause of death in this case?
Yes.
Okay. Concerning Elizabeth Griffith, Dr. Barr, was there anything in the toxicology screen that contributed to your diagnosis in this case, or was that another one of these things that was ruled out as a possible cause of death?
The only thing that was positive in her toxicology report were things that you would expect to see in a decomposing body, metabolites of decomposition. There were no illicit substances or anything else that I could conclude that caused her death.
When you were doing your examination of Elizabeth, did you find any defensive wounds on her hands?
I did not.
Now, Dr. Barr, when you're doing an autopsy, do you also, as part of that process, look for indication of sexual abuse or sexual violence against the decedent?
Yes.
Why do you do that?
We do that in many homicide cases, especially if we suspect there may be sexual activity prior to, if it's documented or if it's suspected.
In your autopsy of Elizabeth Griffith, was it possible to determine whether or not sexual violence or sexual abuse had happened prior to her death?
As with all cases where we suspect any kind of sexual activity, we did perform a sexual activity or a rape kit on Elizabeth Griffith, but I was not expecting to see any findings due to the nature of the decomposition of her body. Any evidence that would have been left behind at the time of any kind of sexual activity would also deteriorate over time and decompose as well. And we did not find anything.
Is that a reference to biological material like sperm?
Yes.
So, and do you know, based on your training and experience, Dr. Barr, how long you would expect sperm, that kind of evidence, to last in the decedent?
It typically starts to break down in the first couple of days. By day 3, the tails and the heads have separated, and after a week or so, with the vigorous insect activity, especially in genital regions and mucosal regions, you would expect that to be obscured.
Because of the insect activity?
Yes.
Okay. And what about physical trauma? Was it possible to determine whether or not physical trauma to, for example, Elizabeth's genitals had happened, or was decomposition too much?
So we did examine thoroughly the genital region, and it was difficult, if not impossible, to make a determination if there was any type of tears based on the extent of decomposition.
So, Dr. Barr, based on what you've described to us, this process of elimination of other causes of death and your affirmative examination of Elizabeth Griffith, based on your education, training, and experience, and within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, were you able to determine Elizabeth Griffith's cause of death.
Yes.
What was that?
It was cervical compression with the mechanism being asphyxia.
Dr. Barr, the move that we've talked about, this, you called it the sleeper hold, I think?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you know why it's called that typically?
Basically, when someone is put into a sleeper hold, compression of these carotid arteries and the jugular veins deprive the oxygen to the brain, and it takes roughly 10 to 15 seconds for someone to become unconscious. So it's a relatively quick process of rendering someone unconscious, although death doesn't occur within 10
So
to 15
a
seconds.
sleeper hold can be applied and the carotid artery can be closed off and someone loses consciousness, but they don't necessarily die.
Correct.
If pressure is continued on the carotid artery and it's closed off, does that then lead to death?
So if pressure is maintained for 2 to 3 minutes or more, then you start to get hypoxic changes in the brain material. That's lack of oxygen to the brain, and the brain tissue starts to die. And relatively soon thereafter, you would have death.
So it's 2 to 3 minutes for that process to start. Do you know, based on your training and experience, Dr. Barr, how long in a range it would take to kill somebody by maintaining that sleeper hold?
I would say within 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay. And applying that, was it 11 or 12 pounds of pressure?
11 pounds of pressure.
Okay. Now, Dr. Barr, did you also perform an autopsy on someone known as Stacy Hicks, aka Stacy Stanley?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did that process start the same way you've already described to us, with an examination of the body as it was received at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office?
Exactly the same.
Okay. And photographed in its state as it was brought in?
Yes.
And then were items of clothing removed from Stacy
Yes.
and then photographed again?
Yes.
Okay. Joint Defense Counsel States Exhibit 365. 366. 367, 368, 369, 370. And 371 which are photographs. Dr. Barr, I'm going to hand you Stacy Exhibit 365. Like for Elizabeth Griffith, for Stacy, did you write a report documenting your findings of this autopsy?
Yes, I did.
So what is 365 that I just handed to you?
States Exhibit 365 is a representation, is a copy of the examination I did on Stacy Hicks, case number OU2016-00246. The first page is the anatomic diagnoses and the cause of death. The following 3 pages, again signed by me, are the detailed external and internal examinations, and then the final 4 pages are the toxicology report as submitted by Dr. Schuler.
Okay, and as with any case, and you mentioned specifically with Elizabeth, the toxicology report is something you rely on in making your ultimate determination as to a cause of death. Is that correct?
Yes.
going to hand you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 366. What is that?
State's Exhibit 366 is a copy of Dr. Schuler's toxicology report, which is 4 pages long, and then the 5th page is a send-out laboratory test that was sent to Access Forensic Toxicology Laboratory, and that would be representative of State's Exhibit 366 for Stacy Hicks.
So State's Exhibit 366, is that an updated or a corrected toxicology report as to the one that was initially or originally attached to your autopsy?
I wouldn't say corrected, but updated, definitely. There was a send-out test that we wanted to make sure of certain things.
So you indicated, Dr. Barr, that when a body is decomposing, there are positives, sometimes positive indicators on a toxicology screen that is part of the natural decomposition. Is that right?
That's correct.
And if you receive a positive on certain things, is that sometimes sent out by the toxicology lab for confirmation as to whether that was there or not?
Yes.
All right. And is that what happened in this case? There was an initial positive, then it was sent out to confirm whether that was true or not?
Yes.
Okay. Could you explain that to us? Because I think that factors into your, or could factor into your ultimate conclusion. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So again, the majority of the things that were positive in Stacy Hicks' toxicology report were things that we would expect to see in a decomposing body. A lot of the same metabolites and that type of thing, with the exception of one on our screen. Buprenorphine was screened as positive, and buprenorphine is a powerful opioid that is used for chronic pain, as well as it's used for people to battle their addiction to opioids. It's used as a supplement to people who are trying to get off of opioids. And our first initial screening screened that as positive, so we sent additional samples out to a forensic toxicology laboratory to verify and quantify if that particular substance was in her blood. And both of those metabolites came back as negative, and it was determined that buprenorphine can also cross-react in a screening process to give you a false positive. And that's what happened in this case.
So there was no buprenorphine in Stacy's body?
No.
Okay. Now, Stacy Exhibit 365 and 366, are those true and accurate copies of those two documents?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And are those both kept in the ordinary course of business at the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's office?
Yes, they are.
Dr. Barr, I'm going to hand you some mark for identification purposes as Stacy Exhibit 367. You recognize what's in that photograph?
Yes, I do.
Who's that?
State's Exhibit 367 is a photograph of Stacy Hicks as she presented to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's office. This is after her clothing had been documented and removed, and it is the case number is also in the photograph depicting that this is Stacy Hicks.
Okay. And the identification for Stacy Hicks, is that done by a family member, or do you know?
The identification of Stacy Hicks, we were able to recover fingerprints from Stacy, and one of our fingerprint investigators was able to make a match through a database.
And do you know whether or not she was also identified by family members, or is that not part of what you knew?
That I'm not aware of.
Okay. So, Dr. Barr, could you take us through your examination of Stacy, please?
So during my external examination, Ms. Hicks was wearing a long-sleeve blue patterned shirt, a blue camisole tank top, black and green brassiere, a denim skirt which was up around her hips, with a black belt. She had black boots on and black socks. There was also a white knit scarf that was wrapped several times around her neck. Beneath that scarf, after we photographed it and sequentially removed it, there was also a leather, like a leather band, like a necklace, a tight necklace type of leather band. And she also had quite vigorous insect activity about the face. The nose, the eyes, the mouth were pretty well obscured, as well as the genital region. We were also able to identify, she was wearing rings on her left hand. There was an earring in the bag with her. She had a couple of bracelets on, I believe on the right wrist. And she also had a series of tattoos. There were tattoos about her left hand, left forearm, around her right wrist. She had one in the back of the neck in the midline, and another tattoo in the mid-upper back.
Okay. Did you, after making these observations of Stacy's body as it was brought to you, did you then do this external examination to see if there was any obvious cause or contributor to death?
Yes.
And how did that go?
So the external examination, once everything had been removed and some of the insect activity had been removed, the only marking on the body, there were no signs of penetrating injuries like stab wounds or gunshot wounds, that type of thing. There were no indications of broken bones or anything of that nature. There was just, again, blanching around the neck underneath this white knit scarf.
What happened next in your examination?
So again, it would lead someone, based on the way she's found and with something wrapped around her neck with a blanching furrow underneath it, would lead you to believe that this is probably an asphyxial death. It was similar to the previous case. And so internal examination was done and systematically went through each organ system to rule out whether or not there was any indication of natural or catastrophic disease, and document all of the findings, and then pay special attention once again to the anterior neck, the front of the neck, and the posterior neck to see if there are any injuries associated with her neck, including hemorrhage in those strap muscles I described, or the soft tissues, as well as the hyoid bone and the cartilage that represents the larynx and the windpipe.
Dr. Barr, did you observe any catastrophic or natural disease as part of this examination that you did?
I did not.
Okay, so you could rule that out, heart attack, things like that, as a potential cause of death. Is that correct?
Correct. She apparently had a gastric bypass surgery. That was one thing I documented. And she had a tubal ligation, but those were the only indications that were outside of anything normal inside of her internal anatomy.
Okay. Then did you look for the cartilage in the neck and the hyoid bone, as you've already described to us?
Yes, I did.
What were your findings there?
Once again, she had no bleeding in the strap muscles, no hemorrhage, and there were no fractures of the hyoid bone or the thyroid or cricoid cartilage, the two cartilage areas that are in the area that would be damaged for manual strangulation or by other means.
So based on that, Dr. Barr, it didn't seem likely that this was those two methods you described previously, the arm bar or the face-to-face hands-on neck. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Anything else of note in your findings in your internal examination of Stacy Hicks, a.k.a. Stacy Stanley?
She had some pooling of decomposition in the soft tissues towards the right side of under the skin, and that It's possible that could have been previous injury. It's highly unlikely because it's not consistent with the pattern that we see. But there was some darkening to the soft tissue over in this area, the right upper chest, and based on the decomposition process, and I'm not sure what position the body was found in, that could just be pooling of blood post-mortem.
So similar to Elizabeth, no external injuries that would indicate a cause of death, no damage to the cartilage or the highway bone in the neck. You took photographs, or photographs were taken, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Dr. Barr, I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 368. What is that, please?
State's Exhibit 368 is a photograph of the neck area of Stacy Hicks as she appeared to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office with that white knit scarf around her neck. In this photograph, where the ruler is on the left side of the photograph would be the ear and the top of her head, the right ear and the top of her, leading towards the top of her head, and to the right of the photograph would be her shoulder and chest, and you can see that she's still wearing the clothing that she was wearing.
Dr. Barr, is that a fair and accurate representation of that part of Stacy that you have just described to us from when you performed your autopsy?
Yes, it is.
Judge, may we publish the photograph?
Any objection?
No objection.
You may.
So Dr. Barr, to the left, as we're looking at this, that's Stacy's head, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in the center, where that white material is, that's this material you described as scarf, I think you called it?
Yes.
It was around her neck?
Yes.
Okay. And is that, as we're looking at this photograph, is that how Stacy, the state she was brought to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Judge. Stacy Exhibit 369.
Yes.
What is that, please?
State's Exhibit 369 is a photograph of Stacy Hicks from the shoulder to the top of the head. In the photograph, the ruler is adjacent to the neck area. This is a photograph of the same area, but only widened, so that now we have the entire face or the right side of the face, I should say, and the upper chest in the photograph. At the top of the photograph is where her mouth is, and to the left of that would be the nose, and then the eyes. You can see the vigorous insect activity, and towards the middle of the bottom would be her right ear, also with vigorous insect activity, and then her chest would be to the right.
So Dr. Barr, in this particular exhibit, now that we've got, this is exhibit 369, now that we've got a farther out shot, we can see it appears in the photograph as if the scarf that you described around Stacy's neck goes all the way around. We can see that a little more clearly in this photo, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, is that a fair and accurate representation of Stacy for this particular part of her body from when you were performing your autopsy?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 370.
State's Exhibit 370 is once again a photograph of the neck region of Stacy Hicks. This is after the removal of the white knit scarf that was wrapped around her neck, and also that leather band I had described that was underneath the scarf. And in this photograph, once again, her head would be to the left of the photograph and her chest would be to the right of the photograph.
So similar with what you described with Elizabeth, when something is on a body, when it's undergoing decomposition, it can leave that blanching as you've described it. Is that right?
Yes, it can.
Okay. Is that a fair and accurate representation of that area of Stacy's body from when you did your autopsy?
Yes.
Judge, with the court's permission, I'd like to publish that photo.
Any objection?
Objection.
It will be published.
And so, Dr. Barr, this was after, that white area in the center is Stacy's neck, is that right?
Yes.
And this was after that ligature had been removed, is that right?
Correct.
So, based on what you found here, this blanching, and based on that ligature around Stacy's neck, what did that indicate to you?
I was in the same thought process. This looks like this could be a soft ligature event, cervical compression of some type with asphyxia, whether it was done by the ligature or whether it was done, again, by a sleeper hold, that would be yet to be determined.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Judge. State's Exhibit 371. What is that, please?
State's Exhibit 371 is a photograph of the right hand and with sort of focusing on the fingernails of Stacy Hicks as they appeared.
And do you look, when you're doing an examination, an external examination in an autopsy, do you look for defensive hand wounds?
Yes, we do.
And things of that nature? Did you find any on Stacy?
I did not.
Okay. State's Exhibit, that was 371, is that right?
Yes, State's
Is that a
Exhibit
fair and
371.
accurate representation of that part of Stacy's body from your autopsy?
Yes, it is.
Dr. Barr, as part of the autopsy, did you try and determine whether or not sexual trauma or sexual assault had occurred prior to death?
Yes.
And what were your findings in that regard?
The findings were, again, we took swabs from all the pertinent areas, the mouth, the vaginal area, and the rectal area. And once again, they came back inconclusive, or negative, I should say.
Okay. And again, with the passage of time, is that surprising to you that with so many days gone by that you would not be able to find that kind of evidence if it existed in the first place?
Correct, especially with the amount of insect activity.
Okay. So, Dr. Barr, based on the information you've provided to us, your consideration of the toxicology screen, your internal and external examination of Stacy's body, based on your education, training, and experience, and within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, did you determine what Stacy Hicks, a.k.a. Stacy Stanley's cause of death was?
Yes.
What was that?
Once again, cervical compression and the mechanism being asphyxia.
Now, we've talked about that being consistent with, one of the ways that could be caused is the sleeper hold that you've described to us. Could that also be caused by a soft ligature?
Yes, it could.
The type that was actually found by you wrapped around Stacy's neck. Is that correct?
It very well could, yes.
Okay. That in the same way that a person's arm can cut off the carotid artery, if something is wrapped around a person's neck and pressure then applied, that can also cause the carotid to be cut off and oxygen to not get to the brain. Is that right?
Yes.
And if that was the case, doctor, would you expect the same findings, meaning that you wouldn't have damage to the cartilage or to the hyoid bone in the neck?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Barr, after completing your autopsies in this case, were those findings transmitted to the Ashland County coroner?
Yes.
In this case, Dr. Barr, did you conduct the autopsies that you've testified to for Elizabeth and for Stacy at the direction of the Ashland County coroner?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Barr, you indicated previously that, well, let me ask you like this. What we've discussed in your process of doing this autopsy, is that the only thing that happens with the body of a decedent when they come to, for in this case, the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office?
Not sure I understand your question.
Is evidence collected from the bodies that's then transported sometimes someplace else so it can be compared to other things?
Yes.
Was that done in this case?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Things like a DNA standard of the decedents, evidence of that nature was collected in this case and then provided to law enforcement in Ashland County, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. For comparison later by someone else, not done by you, is that fair to say?
Yes, as a consulting agency, we're doing this as a subcontractor, and so at the direction of Ashland County Coroner's Office, it would be standard to collect these items in a homicide, possible homicide case anyway.
DNA standard and other kinds of biological evidence?
Yes.
Okay. And so to your knowledge, Dr. Barr, were DNA standards taken from Elizabeth and from Stacy in this
Yes.
case? Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Cross-examined.
Dr. Barr, you described when you were talking about Elizabeth Griffith, you described, I guess what's called a sleeper hold, where the arm, one arm and the other is applied around the neck and actually the throat, middle of the throat, kind of down in the elbow joint, I'll say. If that hold is applied for a period of time and let loose, and a person go kind of unconscious and slump, they'll be alive?
Yes, after 10 to 15 seconds or so, they would lose consciousness, but if the pressure was released, they could come back to consciousness.
And then if reapplied again and held on for a period of time, that would eventually cause death. Not eventually, but soon cause death, is that correct?
If the pressure were maintained for 3 to 5 minutes.
I hear when you said sleeper hold, it reminded me of when I was a youngster and go to professional wrestling matches. They would talk about the sleeper hold, and the one that had the hold applied would kind of go down like that, and they let him loose, and lay there for a little bit, you back up, they wrestle again. That's what you're describing.
Yes, I think that's where the term actually comes from.
That's what I thought, yes. Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Barr.
Thank you, sir.
Any redirect, Mr. McNamara?
Dr. Barr, when somebody dies, are their bowels, do their bowels evacuate? If there's material in there to evacuate?
I've seen it both ways.
Okay, so when someone dies, their bowels can evacuate, is that fair?
They can, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, doctor. You're excused.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
It's now 12:27 on the courtroom clock. We're going to take our lunch recess. Please be back in the jury room by 1:30, ladies and gentlemen. Don't discuss this case. Don't form any opinions or conclusions. Don't look at any media coverage. And please comply with the court's admonitions. We'll be in recess until 1:30 p.m.